This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.
Welcome to the Lake Superior Podcast. I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara. We are made stronger by story, and there's no better source than the continent's largest body of fresh water, Lake Superior.
So join us as we highlight the 5 national parks that ring this greatest of the Great Lakes, meet the people, tour the places, and learn about the projects that make these parks and body of water so remarkable.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara.
Welcome once again to the Lake Superior Podcast. Today, Frida, you have set up a conversation that I'm actually looking forward to having here because I like the stories that we get from the folks that take the time to do what our guest is doing. Tell us a little bit about what we've got coming up here.
Well, Walt, when did you know you wanted to be a broadcaster?
When I was a kid, probably 7, 8. Somewhere in there. It was in there in the beginning, off the bat.
You bet. Yep. Yeah. Yep. You know, our life path, it's really interesting. And I don't think your dad wasn't in broadcasting, though.
No, but he was a talker.
There you go. Well, when we look at how we become who we become and who we become from, this is what makes our conversation today with probably Lake Superior's most famous photographer, Craig Blacklock. And it's so wonderful to have him on the line with us and to learn where this amazing talent and art came from.
That's right. Craig Blacklock joins us now, photographer and author out of Moose Lake, Minnesota. And welcome to the podcast, Craig.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Well, we're talking about life paths here. Let's kind of just start with that. We like to ask our guests a little bit, what is the path that led you into photography and then Lake Superior and its appreciation? Let's talk about that. How'd you get where you are?
Well, my dad, Les Blacklock, was one of the pioneers in color nature photography, and he started doing this right out of World War II. His advisors in college said, well, there is no such thing as a nature photographer, which really there wasn't back then. But he cobbled together a living doing both movies and stills. He did the Hams Beer Land of Sky Blue Waters campaign. That was kind of our bread and butter when I was growing up.
Gotcha.
And I traveled with him from the time I was a tiny little kid on adventures to the Boundary Waters, to the Canadian Rockies, Glacier, Yellowstone. And by the time I was 9, I had advanced out of my Brownie Hawkeye and started shooting a Leica 35 millimeter. And by the time I was about 15, I started working with a 4x5 view camera. So I was learning kind of by osmosis, just mimicking what he was doing, what he was seeing. He never really gave me any formal instruction, but somehow I just picked it up by being alongside of him. And then in college, I studied both photography and ceramics and did both of those professionally beginning in 1976. But eventually photography won out, and I worked with my parents. My mom kind of ran the business, as is often the case. And so I traveled with my dad and sometimes independently, working on similar projects. We did books and calendars together. And then I eventually got into making fine art prints, which the technical advances really hadn't gone far enough that my dad got into doing that. But I took over making prints for both of us. So as far as Lake Superior, I've been working on a number of things. Well, we did a Great Lakes country calendar beginning in, I don't know, maybe 77 or 8, something like that. So I started shooting Lake Superior for that. And then Dad and I also did a book called Minnesota Wild, which had one of the chapters being the North Shore of Lake Superior on the Minnesota coastline. But my first big project on the lake was a book called The Lake Superior Images, which went from about 1984 through 91 or 2. The book came out in 1993. And as part of that project, I got into kayaking. I started working on the book in 84, and I bought my kayak in 88. And I circumnavigated the lake in 91, a 1,200-mile, 100-day trip, which helped to put all the pieces together. I've been doing a lot of smaller trips, as most people travel. You drive someplace, you put in, you go out to a park, and you go back to your car. Mm-hmm. And I'd done that all the way around the lake, at least once to most of the places and a couple times to a lot of them. But trying to figure out how they relate to each other when you're driving, like going around Thunder Bay, is very different than when you're paddling across from the Minnesota shoreline up to Pie Island in the middle of Thunder Bay and then off to the Sibley Peninsula. So it helped to give me a feeling as to how everything related. And in a lot of ways, the lake seemed to shrink for me when I paddled around it. The things were more connected, closer together than I had previously conceived them to be.
So I wanted to ask you then, in terms of doing a trip like that, an effort like that to go around the lake, which is a serious commitment, how did that end up shaping your perspective from that point on with your work that you would do from there on?
One of the things that I realized doing the circumnavigation was the tremendous diversity within the shoreline, which makes every part of the lake that much more special and increased my urgency in wanting to help protect the lake through additions to national parks, state parks, conservation easements, any method that we could do to prevent Lake Superior shoreline from becoming a strip city, which is what so many of the other Great Lakes have become, where it's just cabin after cabin after cabin.
Sure.
And the majority of the public loses access to it, and even the people that are fortunate enough to have one of those homes or cabins have lost that continuity of a wild, beautiful shoreline. You get out of the lake and you're looking at somebody else's house. You walk down the beach and you run into the no trespassing sign. Yeah. So I worked, after doing the circumnavigation, on wanting to make sure that other people would have that same opportunity. And we formed with a number of other kayakers who went to the Minnesota State Legislature and had legislation passed establishing the Minnesota Lake Superior Water Trail, with camping sites and rest areas for kayakers along the shoreline, so that you knew where there was going to be a safe public landing coming up in either direction.
That's interesting so far with that. Now, can I ask how many years you've actually been doing this photography? Because it sounds like there's a lot of history here. You referenced 77 with a calendar and such, but working with your father, how many years have you been as a photographer doing this kind of work?
Well, I sold my first things probably around 1969 or 70, but full-time since 1976.
That's several years. I mean, yeah. it's kind of a question here that I know Frida put together, too, is like just the numbers of shots and combined with the work you've done with your dad. I mean, you and the Blacklock name are kind of synonymous with taking photos of the big lake. I mean, do you have any idea how many pictures you may have taken?
I don't. And at least in the beginning, I didn't make a lot of photographs. My dad had a saying that the difference between an amateur photographer and a professional is that the professional doesn't take the pictures that never get seen, that wind up in the wastebasket. So especially with 4x5, which was $3.50 a shot, I didn't go clickety-click-click.
Right.
I might go out and make 3 images a day, maybe 3 exposures of each one. And that was enough that over the years I was able to do 9 books on Lake Superior. Now, the more recent one, like Light Waves, I did with a digital camera. And the very nature of what I was doing of showing reflections in Lake Superior's waves, I could control some things, but not every wave. So I would tend to shoot hundreds of images and then sift through those to find the ones that were most exciting.
You have such experience on Lake Superior. Craig, what is fueling you after decades now? Why are you still interested in that lake?
Well, Lake Superior to me is what Yosemite was to Ansel Adams. I think any natural area, if you get to know it well enough, if you live with it long enough, can provide a lifetime of subject matter. It's just the more you get into something, the deeper your understanding, the more strongly you see it. There's just endless possibilities. And I've gone through many different iterations of how I'm interpreting the lake, from fairly literal landscapes to black and white nudes in the landscape, showing what it felt like to be within the environment. And now with light waves, more abstract or fractal derived, looking at the shattering of the reflections. It's quite a different way of viewing the lake. I look at it as an amalgamation of everything that I've done before, that all of the subject matter I've photographed in the traditional landscapes has kind of been put in the blender of Lake Superior's waves.
I love that. That's a great line. Do you have after all this experience, do you have a favorite place or even a favorite season or even time of day?
My favorite place, a very discreet place, is a small island east of Pick Island in Lake Superior on the Ontario coast. And it's a smooth bedrock. It looks like the glaciers have left 5 minutes ago. They're very clear scratches where the glaciers dragged rocks across. There are little pools that are like gems set into the bedrock, reflecting the colors of the sky, whatever that might be. Caribou on the island or nearby. So it's one of my favorite parts of the lake, and that particular island I've photographed a number of times and just fallen in love with it. I took my wife there on our honeymoon. On a larger scale, I would say Pakistan National Park in Canada. It's sort of like you take the rock outcrops of the Black Hills and you drop them into the ocean. So it's fantastic, rugged scenery and remote enough that often you can go several days between seeing another person. I like solitude, and places like Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore are incredible scenery, but solitude has disappeared, at least along the shoreline, and we're losing it in the Apostle Islands as well. It's just, as it becomes more and more popular, it's harder and harder to get campsites, and you're seeing a lot more people out there enjoying it, which was good in one way, but if you're looking for solitude, it's not what we're finding there. I guess on the U.S. side, Isle Royale is probably the place that I'd want to spend more time because it's beautiful and you still can get away from folks.
Yeah, that makes good sense because it certainly is. That one's not quite so easy to get to, and you have to be determined to get to that one. We're talking with Craig Blacklock here on the podcast today, photographer and author out of Minnesota, talking about his photography of Lake Superior and the Great Lakes. I know this has got to be a Frida question about the kayaking, which is her thing. Go ahead, Frida. Find out about this.
Oh, my goodness. I mean, first of all, I love when I am kayaking, and you're always saying dig the camera out. I've lost quite a few little Nikon Coolpix kind of waterproof cameras to drop them in, and especially when you're starting to say about light waves, because we so many times we look up, but there's also fascinating when you look down and trying to capture those rocks. But Craig, to do it from a kayak, and I'm assuming you're in a sea kayak, you've got maybe, 18 inches across your lap at the most. That thing, you lean over to get a better shot, and you could be taking a dunk.
Well, I purposefully bought a boat that has high capacity and very good initial stability. It's a Winona Sea Otter Expedition model, which I bought in 1988. So it can carry 3 weeks' worth of gear and food. And when I'm kayaking, I carry a dry bag between my feet with my normal camera, and it's not a waterproof camera. So when I see something I want to take a picture of, I have to pop my spray skirt, which, depending on the conditions, can be just a little bit uneasy to do that to begin with. But then I have to open up the spray skirt or the dry bag, take my camera out, and put the paddle down across my lap and take my pictures. Often the wind is the bigger issue, trying to keep the kayak aimed the right direction. So many times I have the camera in one hand and the paddle in the other hand, trying to stay oriented. But I've gotten used to what I'm doing over the years, and Never lost anything into the lake from the kayak. Never had any waves wash over the deck or into the cockpit with a spray skirt's been off of it. I learned a long time ago that the kayak is much better at maintaining its stability than we think it is. I think a lot of people that tip it over themselves, where if they just had sat still, they would have been fine.
Yeah. It's interesting because you talk about doing this and no equipment lost and everything. And, technology has changed, and we can pick this up a little bit later in our conversation. But technology really has changed with being able to capture images for better or for worse. And you mentioned you work with digital photography in one of the last works that you're doing. But how has technology changed? Everybody seems to have a camera on their phone. Everybody seems to be able to do this. You are at a different level of photography, and I understand that. We understand that here, but I'm just curious as what your perspectives are as there is more of this out there nowadays, and how that has impacted you as a professional photographer.
Well, it's absolutely made it more difficult to make a living, and a lot of my peers have simply given up and called it quits. I'm 69. I want to keep going for a while. I've got projects that I want to continue doing, but it's getting harder and harder to make a living doing it. Certainly, everybody can afford a good professional camera, and even phone cameras now are really quite good. You don't want to make a print, 60 inches wide, but if you're making something 20 or 30 inches wide, they're pretty decent. So everybody can go out and make images that are quite nice. And the software is becoming easier to use. You don't have to be an expert in Photoshop to make something look pretty good. So that's really wonderful. And, I'm happy there are a lot of people out there enjoying nature and having a grand time making images of their own and bringing their own memories home and putting them on the wall. The difficulty for me is that it's harder to make a living. And I think the biggest problem has been there are a lot of part-time professionals that don't value their work at a level that would make a living. They don't have to factor in insurance and food and all the other things. They're just hoping to pay for their materials. Well, that has kind of established the price points down and down and down. And those of us who have to make a living and pay all those bills, it becomes tougher and tougher.
But Craig, you have also been an author. So I guess it's not just your photos, but how you weave those together in the narrative and bring it to the public in a different format than just, a framed print. And I'm
trying to develop a feeling for the lake and a reverence for the lake, provide a story behind the images. So, yes, when people come into my gallery, they're going to get something very different than if they're going to an art fair, both in the images and the story around the images. And if they pick up one of my books, some of them I've done the writing, some of them I haven't, but I enjoy doing the writing, and I write regularly for a publication that the University of Minnesota Center for Spirituality and Healing puts out. So it's combining my photography and images, generally around the theme of mindfulness-based meditation.
Now, this is something I do want to touch into, is that your website says that your mission is art and environmentalism at the interface of land and water. If you know anything about the big lake, and I say this all the time, that the big lake builds big ideas and big thoughts, whether that's through a crowd of people or through that solitude. But I'm hearing healing and using the power of the lake, and I do this a lot. I mean, we're so lucky to be on the shore of this big lake. But you just touched on healing, and you touched on the imagery and the solitude and everything. How does this all work together for you to continue this art and environmentalism and putting it together with land and water and people? How does that all come together?
Well, certainly anything you love, you want to protect, whether it's a person or a landscape. And so I speak hopefully eloquently about the need to do more to protect the shoreline from development. I think we're doing a better and better job of protecting the water quality on the lake. But we have a long ways to go to be willing to say to people, no, you shouldn't build a home there. That should belong to everybody because it's just so special. As far as the healing aspect, the light waves book, the full title of that is Light Waves, Abstract Photographs of Reflections from Lake Superior. So it's all images of reflections in the water. And they're kind of fractal-based. Waves are fractal patterns, and it's been demonstrated that fractal patterns, whether they be tree branches or clouds or waves, actually produce brain waves that are a kind of a relaxed, feel-good state. And so when people view my light waves images, whether it's in the book or I also have a video that's animating these images, people find relaxation and healing in them. It was interesting. I was giving a program the other day, and I showed little 5-minute segments of my video, and one woman had a smart watch on, and she looked at her watch and she said, my heartbeat went down 10 minutes while I was watching that little segment of video.
I love it.
Yeah, I can see that. You know, that brings back your father, Les. He once told you that some places are simply so special that they need to belong to everybody. And I feel that just underlines the 5 national parks on Lake Superior. Absolutely.
Yep. I first heard him talking in that way when I was a little kid. We owned the southern shore of Anderson Lakes in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, southwest of Minneapolis, and at that time it was pretty much wild. We had 17 acres of beautiful wooded land on a lake, and we had developers showing up almost weekly with basically blank checks trying to buy it to develop it. And my dad said, no, this is too special. Someday it's going to be parkland. And it took quite a number of years, but finally it ended up in the Metropolitan Park system and protected. And that's been the way I viewed Lake Superior, that the riparian shoreline is more rare than our virgin prairies, and certainly equally or more beautiful. Doesn't that deserve protection, and shouldn't that belong to everybody? If you're going to have housing development, can't it be on the other side of the road? And similar to Oregon, keeps the coastline available to everybody, so you can walk down it for miles on end, land your kayak or other boat wherever you wish to. So I'm afraid we've failed tremendously. Canada has done a wonderful job now with the National Marine Conservation Area, where there are many, many, many miles of public lands protected.
We're talking with Craig Blacklock today. He is a photographer and author out of Minnesota, photography of Lake Superior. 19 or so books, according to the notes here from Frida, and you've got Light Waves now is the latest one. Where can people find out more about your works? How can they get a chance to experience some of this stuff? What's really the best way to find out more?
We have 2 websites, the more general one with our bookstore, and we have a new 2024 Lake Superior calendar on that, is blacklockgallery.com, and Blacklock is like a black lock on a door, so blacklockgallery.com. And then my fine art website is craigblacklock.art, A-R-T at the end.
Okay. Now, do you have another book in the works? Are you putting something together? I mean, it sounds like you're always into something. Like you said, you weren't quite done yet, and you have more to do.
Yeah, even when I was working on the Light Waves book, I had started a renewed version of the Lake Superior images, which, as I mentioned, came out in 1993. Well, that was the time when I was shooting 4x5 film, and I was limited to pretty much everything had to be on a tripod. I did a few images from a medium format camera in the kayak. But now with digital, I have so much more freedom as what I can do from the kayak, and I can fly a camera on a drone and be pretty much anywhere I want to be, up to 300 feet high. So the possibilities are things that I could never have dreamt about the first time I worked on the Lake Superior images. So these will be landscapes from around the entire lake, Isle Royale. The one place I haven't been yet is Mishpicotton Island. I hope to get out there in the next couple of years. So people can come into my gallery in Moose Lake. It's between Duluth and Minneapolis on I-35 and see what's happening. I've got things on the wall and on a computer screen. So I love sharing things. I love being able to, even if you're not wanting to buy something, you just want to know where to go on Lake Superior or have a photography question, please stop in.
We are so grateful for your artistry, your years. And I'm thinking right now it's still it's a little wavy out there, but it's not really, really cold. And I just love to think of those winter scenes, Craig. Just bundle up, sir, and keep going out there and showing them that winter scene, because I think it's just the awe-inspiring of what snow and wind and waves all can become. Yeah. It's spectacular.
It's hard to beat sea smoke.
Yeah, it's true.
Sea smoke.
Yes, you're right. And as we talk about this here with you today, it's really been it's been a pleasure having you on the program today. But it sounds like we've been lucky on the podcast in the last several episodes to talk with people that have a lot of passion for what they're doing, and that is really coming through in what you are telling us about. And I'm hoping that folks will take the time to check out your work, find out more about what you do, see some of your images. And again, go ahead, tell them where they can find that. What's the best way to do it?
So blacklockgallery.com is my general website, and then the fine art website is craigblacklock.art, and my gallery is in Moose Lake, Minnesota, just off of I-35.
All right, Craig, thank you very much today. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm really looking forward to looking into more of your work. So, thank you today.
Oh.
Okay, thank you both very much.
You betcha.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Happy paddling.
That's Craig Blacklock, who is a photographer and author. He's got the shop in Moose Lake, Minnesota, joining us today. And, Frida, that, as I said to Craig in the conversation, we've had a chance to really talk to some people really passionate about what they do at the big lake. And that really came through today.
Lake Superior does that to us.
Yeah.
It really is. It is just so awe-inspiring. And to know that since a very, very young lad, and understanding that his father passed on that reverence for nature photography to begin with, but then focus on Lake Superior and how gifted we are.
Yeah, and he raised some very good points in our conversation today about development, what we should keep, what we should preserve, what we can let go. And it was a good chat talking with him today.
I'm so grateful we have 5 national parks on that lake.
Mm-hmm. That carry this mentality.
Yes.
That's why I do it. Well, again, if there is something that you would like to hear on the podcast, you can get an idea to us by contacting the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. Be happy to hear from you. If you've got a suggestion, let us know. We will see if we can seek out who it is to talk about. But it's been another great conversation, and we appreciate you joining us today. I'm Walt Lindala.
I'm Frida Waara. Thanks for listening. The National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, NPLSF, is the only official nonprofit 501c3 fundraising partner of the National Park Service for all 5 U.S. national park sites on Lake Superior.
To learn more about NPLSF projects and programs, you can visit the website at nplsf.org or friend them on Facebook.
I'm Frida Waara.
And I'm Walt Lindala. Thanks for listening to the Lake Superior Podcast.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.